It's gonna be a little bit blah blah, so don't stress, you don't miss anything. Welcome to the Anonymes. It is taking place as part of Sarkis solo exhibition. And it might give you a sense of how we can transform exhibitions into learning environments. Because we learned a lot from this senior artist who dedicated a heart, a year for this show. Yesterday we started already with Ruth Noack, and hopefully after Hou Hanru, for the guests from Strasbourg, I kindly asked her to come back. She won't give you the full keynote speech, but you will get a glimpse of her practice. And I am very thankful to the Kunsthalle team. When I was dealing with some visa issues, they took care of this excellent event and organization, and all the guests who traveled from different parts of Europe, and of course with Strike and Deutsche Bahn, it was nice to finally meet here. At number 5, on the left wing, when you go until the end of the corridor, you see the Anonymes. Basically, they are the works that we are dedicating the whole weekend. I'm sure you have Sarkis booklets. We have Sandeep, our curatorial assistant, who give you excellent entry for Sarkis practice. But let's forget all of them for a second and let's think about Anonymous. In real life, online, at many layers. The unknown, the things that we don't know, people who don't want to declare their identity. Or, I don't know, V for Vendetta, I don't know how you interpret. But Anonymous can be really a good political standing point for many of us. Because, I mean, they scan our eyes, they insert chips into our bodies, so eventually the notion of control is going to change a lot. So staying anonymous could be a political space. And Sarkis did several works with this, and yesterday we mentioned one of them. But of course, let's repeat again, these 2 days talking about the Anonymous, with a quotation to Tipple, who is also a Paris-based Anonymous collective, like Sarkis. They had the golden time, it's like 20 years work. This is why I also wanted to revisit that quotation, and that was deconstructed very beautifully yesterday by Ruth Noack. So I will not repeat that quotation. Instead, I will bring Payam Sharifi from Slavs and Tatars, and we had a little bit of revision in the title. The original text that we were discussing about their presentation had a beautiful question, so I wanted to title the whole seminar around it. How can we write our world and universe without relying on anthropomorphic navigation? It looks complicated, but when you know what their practice does, and also in relation to the works that Sarkis does, I thought this is an excellent place. And Payam revised the title, He Loves Humor, and you will discover Slavs and Tatars after a little introduction maybe. Sandeep, is there any way to stop the water, or I mean, for me it's beautiful. It's like Ottoman Palace that the pool is there when you close your eyes, but you want to go to the toilet all the time. So is there a way? Slavs and Tatars is an internationally known art collective devoted to an area east of the former Berlin Wall and west of the Great Wall of China, known as Eurasia. They are based in Berlin and founded in 2006. You didn't put it in your bio. Since its inception in 2006, the collective has shown a keen grasp of polemical issues in society, clearing new paths for contemporary discourse via a wholly distinctive form of knowledge production, including popular cultures, ritual and esoteric traditions, oral histories, modern myths, as well as scholarly research. Their work has been the subject of solo exhibitions at institutions across the globe, including Vienna Secession, MoMA, New York, South Istanbul, Albertinum, Dresden, among others. maybe hopefully Kunsthalle Baden-Baden one day. The collective's practice is based on 3 activities: exhibitions, publications, and lecture performances. And Payam is very good with it. The collective has published more than 12 books to date, including the most recently Lookbook with Distance Verlag. In 2020, Slavs and Tatars opened the Pickled One. Some of you might be familiar with it, and especially in Berlin, it has a long connection with the studio, right? And Payam, surprise us.
Thank you, Roberta. Thank you for all of you that are coming here on Saturday afternoon. The topic of today is something which is very both dear to us, but also quite perplexing as a subject matter, the idea of anonymity. Anonymity, first of all, is a very strong word. I would say in no way are we interested in being anonymous, but, for example, we don't publish portraits of ourselves, we don't list the members of Slavs and Tatars. At the same time, what's for me so interesting is that it's not because we're not hiding our identities. For example, as you see today, Adnan mentioned my name. If you do some Google searches, you can find who are the members. When I give lecture performances, I don't hide behind the screen or scramble my voice. But the problem is that, in some sense, it's really the poverty of our languages. And the only languages I know are Indo-European languages, unfortunately. And the Indo-European languages I know, there's not really many degrees of stages between anonymity and exposure. So when people say, for example, Payam, we would like to publish your date of birth or your background for Slavs and Tatars, I say no. They say, but you are not anonymous. And I have to answer usually to the press departments of museums. I say, we're not anonymous, but at the same time, I don't want people to be focusing on who is behind Slavs and Tatars. Not because, again, many artists' work is about their own subjectivities, their own personal lives. Some of the best work in art has been about this. But that's not what Slavs and Tatars was created for, and that's not what we're interested in. I'm not interested in my personal history or other people's members' personal histories in Slavs and Tatars, how we see things. We're much more, let's say, in some ways, facing the street or facing the public, more interested in the world outside of us, not the world inside of us, in some sense. And one of the strangest things is, as an artist, we started relatively late. We became artists at 35, which is not late, but it's not young. We were not born to be artists. I would be very happy doing other professions in my life. I don't have to be an artist. It was not kind of calling. And I don't think it's the same. I think it's the same for my colleagues. However, one of the things which has struck us, the more we work within the profession of the arts, is to what degree art is presented very clearly as art. What I mean by this is 99% of the exhibitions you go to for contemporary art, if you walk into the space from 100 meters away, you know it's art. This is a very perverse thing. Of course I understand why artists are doing this, and I understand why we would have that desire to present our work as art, but actually, if you think about it, the most transformative experiences happen as a public, for me, not as an artist, but as a public experience in art. Those moments that have changed my life have been those moments I did not know what I was looking at was art. It was never clear when I was going to an exhibition that, okay, I'm going to see a show and this has an impact on me. Not, again, it might change other people's lives because they might be devoted to art. For me, art history is not what interests me, what the world interests me. And it's a little bit like, I believe that the artist has to be a trickster in some sense. That's why Mullah Nasruddin, if you're familiar with our work, Nasruddin Hoja, this kind of 12th century wise fool, he is so important to us because, in fact, the idea of a trickster, you would not reveal your cards. So in some sense, you should not be showing that it's art. You should be, in some sense, dissembling. Now, I will talk a little bit about some Shia Muslim ideas today, and just to throw some out. One of the very important Shia ideas is this idea of taqiyya, which is dissimulation. Dissimulation, if you're familiar with the basic fundamentals of why Shia and Sunni split, or what the difference between Shia and Sunni is, essentially Shia is, for those of you who are not familiar, Shia is the dummy's guide to Islam. Shia is 20% of Muslims in the world, Sunni are 80%. And because Shias represent 20%, they usually have to, they feel that they're persecuted, and so they have this victim complex. So what they usually do is, there's this idea in Shia theology that you can dissimulate, you can act, you can do everything possible to show you're not Shia. You can eat pork, you can drink alcohol, you can transdress, you can do everything you want so that people don't know that you're Shia if you're being persecuted. It's allowed. And for me, this idea is interesting because, of course, dissimulation is something which is very, it's a form of complexity, but it's also a form of escaping this very, I find, reductive idea of subjectivity. That I am one person, Adnan is one person, Ruth is one person, that we are each individual people. We are not, in fact, I believe that we are multiples, and only through that multiplicity can we collapse the idea of subjectivity and whatever the opposite of anonymity is. I don't know what is the opposite of anonymity. Is it exposure? Is it individualism? What is it in some sense? And in fact, this is something which comes to this idea of kind of amphiboly. Amphiboly is a concept of having two contradictory phrases in the same sentence, like this. It's a very kind of the highest form of perception. It's a perception. So it's kind of a collapsing of the sentence on its own logic. There's a very interesting the terms in English for amphiboly, synonyms for this are ideas like cognitive dissonance. Well, for me, the best example of this is something actually a very Christian idea, which is called coincidenti oppositorum. Coincidenti oppositorum is a Catholic idea, or Christian idea, which is that the unity of opposites, or the kind of coincidence of opposites, and basically to convey the holy or the transcendent, you have to use non-rational, so unclear, illogical language. You find this in sort of 19th century Russian literature also, that the highest form of, again, perception is this form of madness in some sense. And if you want to find kind of the transcendent, the holy, you cannot do it through human language. You have to do it through sort of superhuman or extra-human or transhuman language in some sense. This is a quote which I come back to very often. It's a quote by Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was the first person in the Catholic Church to introduce Buddhism and Islam, Zen Buddhism and Sufi Islam into the diocese. So he was teaching in a monastery in Kentucky. He's a British monk, but he was teaching Islam and Buddhism to his soon-to-be, or his students, his monastic students. And the quote is, actually the full quote is, "On the heart of poverty is written, quit this world, quit the next, and quit quitting." What he means by this, again, my understanding of this is that even the most liberating ideology or liberating idea becomes a prison of some sort. That even if it gets you to where you think you've gotten, you have to break that. And again, coming back to the idea of being an artist, as an artist, the reason why artists, the first thing that artists usually, the normal trajectory of an artist is, the romantic trajectory of an artist is, the artist is toiling in a corner, is unrecognized, blah, 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 and once they're recognized, they feel finally that they're getting the due that is worth that they've been working towards, and that's the moment that most artists sort of press on cruise control and say, okay, this is the moment. That's the moment that actually you have to stop doing exactly what you're doing. So as an artist, when anybody recognizes what you're doing, you actually have to stop doing that, otherwise, in my view, it's the end of what you're doing because you're not learning anymore. You've created a kind of style or kind of a signature. And this is one of the interesting things about Sarkis. Not many artists have that ability to not have a signature. Sarkis is one of them. I can name them on one or two hands. The artists that are alive today that don't have a signature that I find interesting, whom I find interesting, let's say. Now, we were talking during coffee about institutional critique a little bit. I grew up in a generation where institutional critique was very important. It is still important. However, for us, I have to say, I find that the institution can save us in some sense. I'm a very old-fashioned person. I believe that institutions can actually provide us a form of anonymity that the artist's signature cannot. What I mean by that is that Slavs and Tatars was founded in 2006. We do not publish our names, we do not publish our biographies, we do not publish our photos, and yet, after 10, 15 years, institutions themselves, other partners always say, Payam, Kasha, Snap, we want you to come here, we want you to give this talk, we want you to do this exhibition. And I was very, it annoyed me. Again, I understand why. I'm the same. It's human instinct. When I see an artist I like, the first thing I ask is where are they from, where do they live, where did they study? But it's not a healthy line of investigation. It actually doesn't tell you, in my opinion, very much about the art. It tells you about the person behind the art. So I don't want to indulge that. It's like I don't want to give more drugs to that the druggie who needs that sort of that pathological interest in the individual. So in 2018 or so, 16, 17, we started what I would say is a kind of small-scale institutionalization. We launched the pickle bar, which is a Slavic version of an aperitivo bar. I personally never believed that wine and cheese is a good way of drinking or eating. I think it's a very bourgeois, Franco-Italian nonsense, no offense. It's much healthier to drink just pure vodka and fermented items. Honestly, it is, believe me. If you drink, that's the way you should drink it. But also, for us, it became a project space where we invite other people to consider the effects of language as a form of weaponization, language as a form of activation. Because what is fermentation? Fermentation is a form of activation of the tongue. But also, exactly today, when everybody is so careful about where the limits of language are, that's exactly what we need to be doing, is pushing those limits of language, what is acceptable, what is not. So Pickleball is a space where we invite other people, other performers, other artists, other curators. We never perform at Pickleball. We are like the MC or the kind of maître d'. We kind of invite people, we do the scenography, but we're not present other than as hosts. And in this, the Pickleball has a kind of program every season. Last season's program was called Costumes and Collapse, about the idea of textiles and fashion at the end of time, so ecological collapse in 1980s, 90s, the collapse of socialism. Before that was a program about lavender languages, how they're basically, as sexuality became, different forms of sexuality became accepted, the languages that were associated with those communities become extinct. Because before being gay was acceptable in the West, gay communities had a form of their own language in English, in French, and those languages are almost extinct in the West, but they're still very active in the East, where these issues are still being debated. So in Russian, in Kazakh, in Persian, there's still a very active form and this is a kind of controversial topic, but the idea of a gay language. Is there a language for us that's associated with sexuality? Of course, it's not a sensualist language, it's a form of resistance, if anything else. We also launched a residency and mentorship program for young professionals from our region to come to our studio and spend 2 months with us. And the reason I'm talking about these is that these are just some forms of, this was not the idea to become anonymous again, but by doing this, I realized that now when institutions contact us, they don't have this infantilizing way that institutions speak to artists. I always found this as a Middle Eastern man, I find it very weird how institutions speak to artists. The institution, it's very generous. It comes from a little place, but it's like, how was your train trip? How was lunch? Are you okay? How was your room? I can take care of myself. Thank you very much. I can pay for my own lunch. I don't need this kind of baby. And I don't think it's helpful. Because of course, the reason why institutions are doing this is because they're not paying you anything. So when they're paying you 1,000 or 3,000 or even 5,000 euros for an exhibition you spend 2 years on, what are you going to do with this 5,000 euros? Not very much. So you're paid in kind of emotional, the word of the day is caring, right? Which of course is nonsense. It's just better if people just paid you properly. Now, now institutions don't do this with us anymore because they understand that we are like a small institution in the sense that art with a capital A, things you put on a wall, only represents 50% of what we do. There is the lectures, as Adnan mentioned, there's the publications, there's the residency, there's the pickle bar, and increasingly other things. In fact, there are other ways of us to think about, not thinking about ourselves. If you see the kind of le fil rouge between all these things, is that we're a little bit bored of this kind of entropic way of people forcing us to think about us. Now, this again is a very Sufi idea. Is this idea of the qutb in Sufism is this idea of the kind of the center. In mystical Islam, you're supposed to make your heart a mirror. It sounds cheesy, but the idea is that you create your heart becomes a mirror, so you constantly reflect others. If you know any Iranians, actually you know this tarof is a form of doing this. every single transaction in Iran is, imagine a country, so I hope you can travel to Iran one day. When you go to Iran, every single transaction, you go to pay for the taxi, you go to pay for the lunch, you go to pay for the post office, every single time you want to give somebody money, they say, it's not worthy of you. It's a gift, please. No, I will not accept it. Every transaction. What this is a form of ta'aruf, it's a form of courtesy, but it's in some sense, it's also linked to this idea of course not Iranians are not Sufis, I'm not saying Iranians are mystical, but it's linked to this idea that you don't want to be indebted to anybody else. You know, so of course they don't mean that also. So when you pay, if you get out of the taxi and you don't pay, the taxi driver will come and be upset at you. You have to understand the code. You have to understand that you say 2 or 3 times, no, I would like to pay. They say, no, it's not worthy of you. No, it's not worthy. No, it's not worthy. And then you pay and you finally go on. Every single transaction. So it's a form of deflecting. And I think that as an artist, this is some way our job is not as intellectually necessarily as much as, how would I say this? Psychologically, it's very important to deflect the attention that's given to us. That we are these kinds of, in some sense, we are incredibly privileged to have people interested in our interior worlds, but what's more interesting is in some ways to kind of, almost like kind of a martial art of some sort, is the idea is to deflect that energy and push it somewhere else. It's not easy to do. I can admit this. I'll just talk about 2 other things, 2 other ways of, for me, the anonymity are interesting. One is to collapse language into its most basic rudimentary forms. What I mean by this is that, I'll give you an example. We have French speakers here, so I can ask, can I ask you to read this in French? So just read it out loud.
Oui, un petit se donne au âne. Un petit à degré de fall. Indolent qui ne s'en cesse. Indolent qui ne se mène. Qu'importe un petit, tout gai de recul.
This is not French, as you can understand. It's not at all French. I will try it one more time with my un petit dumpty c'est ton osal, un petit dumpty a degré de fall. Do you understand what it is? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty, because French don't have h, right? That's what the French, they say, how many how else did you speak today? They cannot understand the difference between age and not age. So, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty a degré de fall. Indolent qui ne cesse, all the king's men, indolent qui se mène, qu'importe Humpty Dumpty together again. This is a form of homophonic translation. It's fascinating because it's basically, in my opinion, and I say this as somebody who speaks many languages, it is the dumbest form of language. But in that stupidity, it's extremely interesting because it's actually, maybe the hardest thing to do is to homophonically translate something into the same alphabet, but have it become another meaning, right? So you're actually taking language to its absolute basic building blocks, which is phonemes, not letters, so what preceded writing, what was speaking, right? Because language, of course, was first a spoken thing before it was written, as we know. But also, what's for us is, if you're familiar with our work, we started as a book club, we're interested in reading, we make sculptures about reading. But reading is again, we think of reading as a private, silent matter. But that's only 150 years history of reading. For the first 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 years of reading, it was oral, it was recited, like Hou did, and it was collected. So books, for most of their history, books or text has not been a private, silent thing, reading. It's been a public, recited thing. You cannot read this to yourself privately and understand what the fuck it says, excuse my French. You have to read out loud. You have to enunciate it, you have to recite it. It forces you to perform the act of reading, which is something we're very interested in. Now, if you think this is complex, this is even more complex. I really regret that I did not contact this person before he died. David Melnick. He was a queer poet living in the Bay Area. He died in 2022. And I really am pissed that I did not contact him before because he did a homophonic and homoerotic translation of the whole of the Iliad into Latin. But both homoerotic and homophonic. Actually, this is homoerotic, it's not homophonic, it's transliterated, because it's going from the Greek alphabet into the Latin. Now, we have Russian speakers here. I'm a Russian speaker. You can make it out because you can read kind of Cyrillic Greek. But you can see this. It says here, aid us to make gay toast. If you ain't a kissed a-okay. And it's actually, you can see this, aid us to make gay toast. If you ain't okay. So it's doing the same thing that the nursery rhymes were doing, but through the Iliad. The whole of the Iliad. I mean, it's quite something. We did the similar, if you're familiar with our Trinities series, this is what we presented in Venice in 2019. These are all forms of transliteration. Essentially, they're using the wrong alphabet for a text that shouldn't be in that alphabet. The best example is here. You know this typical kind of stupid American college humor, to beer or not to beer? You know, it says on a t-shirt. And even worse is 2 beers or not 2 beers. It's really stupid humor. They're taking a very existential question from Shakespeare, to be or not to be, and they're putting it into kind of a form of consumption, to beer or not to beer. Now, as an artist, the challenge becomes, how can I recuperate, how can I bring this consumption question back into the question of existence, to be or not to be? If Ruth drinks a beer or doesn't drink a beer, who cares? It's a question of consumption. But if I write to beer or not to beer in Arabic, then for me, or for Adnan to drink a beer or not to drink a beer is not just a question of consumption. It's a question of being, because Arabic being the language of Islam, or the alphabet of Islam, it becomes a question of, who am I? Am I a Muslim or am I not a Muslim? Do I belong to a Muslim community or not? So again, that kind of Shakespearean existence comes back into the question of drinking a beer or not drinking a beer. So all of these are different forms of wrong alphabet text. In fact, when we showed this in Venice, it's the first time I ever wrote to an editor of a newspaper, the Financial Times and Review of Venice, and they said right next to Rosemary Truckle's works are typical art you find in the biennial by Slavs and Tatars, illegible art. And I was pissed because there's 15 different alphabets or languages here. Because a British person who only speaks English can't read them, it's not my fault, you know? Maybe you should go learn another language other than English and then write your reviews, but it's okay. They didn't answer me, the Financial Times. So another form of this kind of basic form of language, of course, in Islam, there's this idea of Hurufism. Hurufism was a 14th century sect of Islam that believed that there is a relationship between the letters of the Arabic and Persian alphabet, and the relationship between those letters and not only numerology, like the letter has a certain symbolism, but actually the hairs on your face. It's fascinating. So the idea is that Arabic has 28 letters, Persian has 32, so you have 4 extra letters in Persian. And these are divisible by 7, and then they identify 7 forms of facial hairs, from your eyebrows to your eyelashes, to your nose hairs, to your ear hairs. Gross stuff, you know? But each of these letters are forms of sort of huruf, means alphabetism, so it's kind of, the literal translation would be lettrisme, but it's not lettrisme of the French version, but they each have a kind of symbolism. And here you can see like faz here, so faz becomes, you know, eyebrows, F, or Ali here in the face of, this is actually a book from Bektashi, from Bektashi, Alevi Bektashi, in the form of Hurufism. And finally, I'll end with another example for us of moving away from the subjective, the individual, the human, is looking at things through the flora and not the fauna. Again, when you're interested in history like we are, it's very easy to talk about figures of history. I think it's very boring to kind of find, oh, this person was forgotten, let's bring them back. I just find it much more interesting to talk about, sort of, to try to escape this interest in person or the individual. The first time we did this was through the fruits of Central Asian Islam in Vienna, in Symposion. The show was called Not Moscow, Not Mecca. The title of the show was based on a policy during Stalinism, was called "To Moscow, Not Mecca." Stalin said to the Muslims of the Soviet Union, "Do not look to Moscow, do not pray to Mecca, pray to Moscow." And we were saying, not Moscow, not Mecca, not communism, not political Islam, because these are the two ideologies of the last century and this century. The same role that communism played in the 20th century, today's political Islam plays that role. It's not a coincidence that Iran replaced the Soviet Union as the kind of enemy of the West. Same time, 1979, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, the revolution in Iran happened, and then the last 40 years, until the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you only heard about Iran in the West. Iran is the enemy, Iran has its hands everywhere, Iran is doing this and this and this, and I'm not in any way justifying the Iranian regime, I'm not at all a fan of the politics, but it's a form of, it's a kind of political pathology of creating a geopolitical enemy, and then piling everything from military-industrial complex to other things into that enemy. The same way that it was done in the 20th century, we're just seeing the play through it today. And what we did is we told the story of syncretic Islam through the sculptures, through the fruits of the region. So through the tut, through the dinya, the melon, and actually there were real fruits on the table, but there were also sculptures. So the very idea was not, again, not to know whether you could use them, you could eat the fruits, you could not eat the fruits, what was real, what was not real. Oops. And more recently, just recently last 2 years ago, we made our first film based on an Uyghur poem, which is called Jang Nive, which Jang Nive means the battle of the fruits. And it's a 19th century Uyghur poem where the fruits are battling each other. So the melon is battling the pomegranate is battling the mulberry is battling the pear. And we use, again, instead of, in some sense, each of the fruits is using a form of, it's not hurufism, but it's a form of calligraphy. Each fruit is drawn using the Uyghur Arabic script name of that fruit. Ironically, the only Turkic peoples today still using the Arabic alphabet are in China. And it's just very interesting that of all the Turkic peoples in the world, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Azeris, etc., the only ones still using Arabic are the ones in China, the furthest from Turkey. If you could find, the bookends of Turkish language are Anatolia and Xinjiang, if you will.
Who translated in Chinese? It's not Google.
It's not what?
It's not Google translate.
No.
But it's also a strange translation.
Yes. Well, I'll show you the film. Hopefully, it's not translated. It's adapted exactly. I mean, the English is not exactly translated. It's a rap battle, so it has to rhyme in some sense.
It's not really in Chinese that you use.
No. It's not Google, I promise. Finally, the last. It's okay. 2 more minutes.
Yes, we are very good time.
The last kind of, I guess, form of anonymity, if you will, is the idea of service industry, which is why this talk is called Service Industry. I grew up in a family of restaurateurs. I'm the only person in the family of, I don't know, as you know, there are hundreds of people in Iranian families. I'm the only person who doesn't work in restaurants in this family.
And carpet business. Either way.
It's true. To be honest, it took me a long time to understand that service industries are actually very, so if you tell an artist or an art school student that you're in the service industry, they take it as an insult. Because there's this idea that art is autonomous, that art is not in service of anything, which is of course very naive, but also just, in some ways it's classist. Because what it's saying is that art is something that doesn't need to answer anybody, it answers itself. And I actually believe it's opposite, is that how I'm more interested, let's say, more and more as time goes forward, is how can we as artists continue to do what we're doing, but have it not be presented as art? How can we put our services almost like, not cancel, this is a loaded word today. How can we, again, deflect the interest in our authorship, but we become service providers for other industries, using or trying to use the powers of the transformative ideals that art has. One example of this is, we were asked by Kunsthalle Baden-Baden group 2 years ago to do a public sculpture, and we decided to reinvest a famous kebab shop a doner shop in Osnabrück. Now, I don't have to tell people here who live in Germany, but those of you who are visiting, I think, are you the only one here from outside of Germany here? There's a very strange thing happening, and there's a very, let's say, unfortunate thing. In some ways, Germany is about 30 years behind the rest of Western Europe when it comes to its relationship to its minorities and identity politics. You could justify it by saying that Germany also was much later to the game of colonialism, with equally disastrous consequences, but a much shorter history of imperialism than the French, the Russians, the Dutch, and the English. But the fact of the matter is that Germans go to kebab shops, but in German high culture still doesn't look at Turkish culture, Kurdish culture as an equally literary culture as themselves. There's still this hierarchy of classes. French culture is somewhere, Italian is somewhere, but sort of Turkish and Kurdish are somewhere not on the same level. So for us it was interesting to kind of, how can we bring this idea of digestive nourishment that people are doing every day at these donor shops, how can we also present forms of literary nourishment, discursive nourishment that these cultures have? And so what we did was we just literally revisited all the, what's called point of sale material. So the wrapper for the doner, or the falafel, or the placemat, or the whatever, just, the name of the project was Aschbildung. So you know what Ausbildung means, a kind of apprenticeship?
Yes.
Yeah, Ausbildung? Sorry? Or education, yeah. And Ash is a Kurdish Persian term for food. So Ashkhane is a restaurant in Kurdish. So Ash was the idea of, again, Bildung, but your Bildung, because again, I don't believe that digestive nourishment and intellectual nourishment are distinct things. There is the Western idea that my mind, Cartesian idea that my mind determines what my stomach does has been debunked for the past 10 years in the West, but thousands of years in Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. This is a very articulate organ. It's just that we haven't spent 600 years thinking about it. We spent 600 years thinking about only this one. So we just used a very famous Turkic, kind of a Turkic version of Beowulf or Iliad, which is called Kutat Mobilik, and just had forms of let's say, forms of intellectual edification in a place of usually just digestive nourishment. Thank you very much.
There was a quotation. I would like to bring it back from Norman Brown. Why did you pick it? I mean, mysteries are instinctively.
Yeah, this is Norman Brown is a very interesting figure. The quote is, "Mysteries are intrinsically esoteric and as such are an offense to democracy. Is not publicity a democratic principle?"
I was really interested in the idea of collective and thinking about this, the question of democracy with anonymity. Do you think it helps to be anonymous to deal with institutions, states, the city? Because when you are running a studio in Berlin, you are not only working with the institutions, you are working with the schools, you are working with the city, you are working with the state through different funding structures, or it's almost like a semi-public space, your studio. Does it help to deal with these constructions through these tools of democracy?
So it's, you're asking this at a very delicate time. I don't think I've ever lived in a country or a city where, Berlin or Germany, where we went from being the darling of the liberal democratic order to the nadir of the Western liberal order in such a short time. I had whiplash. In 6 months, it went from the coolest city to the least cool city in the Western liberal progressive order. As we were talking about during lunch, it's always a bit exaggerated. It's a kind of leftist populism, which is behind us. But the main thing is it's no longer, we can definitely feel the dangers of what the dependency on those state organs means. I mean, we became, in some sense, over the past 10 years in Berlin, last year was 10 years in Berlin, we became a little bit like the extended branch of German foreign policy in our region. So whenever German foreign policy, cultural policy wants to do something in the former East, in Minsk, in Belarus, in Yerevan, they would often come to us and say, what should we do? And that's actually how we started this deflection. We didn't want to do a show all the time. We said, maybe we can help you find other people to do things that we're interested in. How can we continue to do things that are not so self-focused? I knew for the whole time that this is not going to last. It was too good. The last 10, anybody could say this. The German economic model was too good to be true for too long. And it came crashing down, and it's going to take a while to come back to its feet. I'm not the kind of doomsday. I don't believe it's apocalyptic. I don't believe that Germany is the sick man of Europe.
Negotiate for a better price next time.
You mean for selling our souls, you mean?
Take money and run away.
Sorry?
Take money and quit this world.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, I think that our interests aligned with the state for many years. Now our interests are diverging. So the question will be, I think your question is more a challenge in the coming years. How can we continue to do this? It's a very good question. I don't know yet.
We have like 10 minutes break. If you are really dying for any fruits, crackers at the back, we will be hanging around there. Please join. It's a small room, but it can fit. There is some small beverage and fruit we can share. And let's keep time because exactly in 10 minutes I will take the microphone back. Thank you.